This is Talk. I'm Peter Cardwell here between now and 1 o'clock. And we're going to speak to the Shadow Transport Secretary, Richard Holden, now for the Conservatives. Richard, good morning.
Good morning. And appropriately, Peter, I am in a car in Basildon today as Shadow Transport Secretary.
Excellent. Well, we're going to talk about cousin marriage in just a second, certainly. But can I just get your reaction to the BBC licence fee? It has gone up from £74.50 to £180. What's your reaction to that, Richard?
I've had issues with the BBC licence fee for some time. I don't think it's a model that works for the modern era. I think it's one of those things that is a slab tax that hits the poorest the hardest as well. I think it's something that we need to obviously have a proper look at. You know, there's some good things the BBC do, like the World Service, but I think far too much of its programming is basically repeats or what should be a commercial product, and it just needs to be looked at properly for the future now.
I want to talk about cousin marriage because you introduced proposals in over a year ago, actually, saying that children of first cousins at greater risk of birth defects, of course, the practice should be prohibited to protect public health. I mean, that's all very sensible. Now we have an NHS hospital trust recruiting a nurse to support families where parents are close relatives. This is Bradford Teaching Hospital, NHS Foundation Trust, advertising the position for a close relative marriage neonatal nurse and midwife. The job description saying the successful candidate would provide comprehensive care and support to families who have recently had a baby and are close relatives, cousins, uncles, aunts, or other closely related family members. It's illegal, of course, to marry your brother and sister in the UK, but weddings between cousins are allowed. Now, is this just the NHS responding to what is happening in Bradford? Is this understandable, or is this a symptom of a dreadful thing that is happening and actually an MP in Parliament has defended at one point?
Yes, it is. I'm afraid that, you know, we need to get this legislation passed to ban first cousin marriage. We should not be having a situation in which first cousins are getting married. And there's three clear reasons for that. The first, and it's overwhelmingly the case, the health implications for the individuals are huge. There have been multiple different studies showing that right across the board, in all sorts of different circumstances, for mental health, but also really for some very, very serious physical health conditions, first cousin marriage causes major, major problems, particularly when it's carried on generation after generation after generation, as it is in some of these communities. And we need to put a stop to it. We wouldn't need to have such nurses and such midwives, specialists in these areas, if we didn't allow it. And I think that's the key thing. We need to show as a society that this sort of thing is totally unacceptable. The impact it has on the individuals, on their rights. You know, how could you ever have a situation where somebody could walk away from a abusive relationship if you share the same set of grandparents, for example? So it's a question around individual rights, it's a question around health, and more broadly, it's also a question around community cohesion as well. Because one of the most important things in society, people can marry freely between parts of society. Then actually, that's what allows a society to be created, rather than keeping these what essentially is like clan-like structures in some parts of our society, and especially in Bradford, where this practice there really is an issue with this practice continuing amongst some of the South Asian Pakistani Muslim community.
So when it actually happens, I mean, how prevalent a problem is it really?
Well, so nationwide, it's a very small very small problem. The problem is in certain communities, in the British Muslim Pakistani community, and also to a lesser degree in some of the traveller communities. This first cousin marriage is an issue, and it's something that needs to be tackled head on. Some people try and defend it as a cultural tradition. I think that's totally wrong. The last Conservative government, which I worked in, we banned marriage for 16 and 17-year-olds. We said, you know, we're going to get rid of the child marriage and we're going to have it at 18. And I think that this is clearly the next sensible manoeuvre, is to say we're not going to have marriage, cousin marriage as well, because it's just because of all the health and the social implications of it for our society. It is just wrong, and we just need to move on it. Nobody is now saying, oh, we need to go back to having people getting married at 16 after we changed it. And as soon as we change this law to to ban first cousin marriage. Nobody's going to want to go back to it. We should stop defending the indefensible as a country. We should stop funding the indefensible as a country with these NHS appointments, and we should ban first cousin marriage. And I hope the government listens, because it's quite clear that the impact of it that it has on families, and obviously, so many people in these communities. And a YouGov poll actually showed that even within these communities, people wanted to see it end. So
is there a distinction, Richard? Is there a distinction between people who, I mean, I remember I had a caller actually when we did this issue previously, I think around the original time when you raised the proposed legislation, when people said, look, a bit later in life, I actually realised that, we weren't going to have any kids or anything, but I actually married my cousin. And some people saying, actually, is it that big a deal? Is it just about having children? Is that's the main issue here from a health perspective? Do you have any objection to people, later in life, for example, marrying their cousins?
I think there is an issue from a health perspective, but I think, as I said, that's one of the three issues here. The others are, if you share the same set of grandparents, and there's obviously issues around control and that broader issues around family relationships. And I think thirdly as well, we don't, having people, we want people to be married and to have relationships right across our society. I think if people are having close relationships within small family groups, often generation after generation, there is also issues there. So yes, the health issue is part of this, but it's not the whole part of it, which is why when I've, when we talk about this and thought about it, actually banning first cousin marriage has got to be the way forwards, because it's the only way we can prevent all of those societal issues, including the health issues, impacting people and families. What
do you think about what Richard's saying, 0344 499 1000? What was it that pro-Gaza MP said, Richard? He said something like, it can bring families closer together. It was an utterly bizarre speech that I remember.
Was.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about Keir Starmer, because clearly he's in a very, very difficult position. I know that Kemi Badenoch has been talking about his former communications director as well today. Where do you see this situation, Richard?
Look, I think we're in this a situation where the Prime Minister has, and you could see it, I thought, at Prime Minister's questions and afterwards during the debate on Wednesday, where he has simply lost the confidence of his own MPs. There are brand new Labour MPs basically standing up and saying, we've got to stop this situation from continuing, and that's the reason the government had to do yet another U-turn after Prime Minister's questions on Wednesday. I don't think the Prime Minister can now survive. I don't think it's in the interest of the country that it survives. I actually think that Labour MPs, if they thought about it, would realise it's not in their interest that he survives either. I really hope that actually the decision is made that he moves on. I don't understand how on earth he could have made the judgment in the full knowledge that Peter Mandelson was continuing his relationship with a convicted paedophile. I don't understand how, in those circumstances, he could think it was possibly the right judgment call to appoint him as our ambassador to the United States. It is, on this issue, it is the Prime Minister's judgment that is being questioned, and it is a really serious judgment. In fact, I was in the House of Commons listening to the debate, and I thought Emily Thornberry made a really good point, the Labour chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. She said it was one thing to stand by people when there's been no conviction, and actually that can be a really good thing, when people have got there's been no conviction, and people are on trial, etc., etc. When somebody is convicted of a serious criminal offence like child sex trafficking, right, then it also shows a sort of character that you are if you stand by them. And I think that's a crucial thing here. What it showed about Peter Mandelson, and then it shows about the judgment of our Prime Minister in keeping him in place. I think those are really serious questions, and I think that actually Labour MPs need to look at themselves and ask if they'd have made the same decision, because I don't think, in their heart of hearts, these Labour MPs, I really don't think the majority of them would have made that decision to appoint somebody who's close to a convicted paedophile. I just don't think they would have done that.
Yeah.
And therefore, if they don't think that judgment's sound, they've got to get rid of the Prime Minister, because he's making judgment calls, serious judgment calls on behalf of our country every single day.
Richard, thank you. That's Richard Holden there, the Shadow Transport Secretary.